On the late evening of July 7, 1996, a call came into the minicab's depot in Lurgan. A taxi was requested under the name Lavery, supposedly for a pickup from the local cinema and a drop-off in Adagorlan. Michael McGoldric, a 31-year-old Catholic father, took the job. He was working part-time as a taxi driver to support his studies at Queen's University Belfast, studies he had just completed 2 days earlier. By the next morning, McGoldric's taxi was found abandoned on a remote country lane near Adagorlan. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, lay McGoldric's body. He'd been shot 5 times in the head at close range. His murder unfolded against the backdrop of the Drumcree standoff, a period of intense sectarian tension over Loyalist parades and nationalist protest. Investigators quickly came to believe the killing was not personal, it was symbolic. A Catholic civilian, chosen simply because he was behind the wheel that night. Evidence later presented in court revealed how the killers had set the trap: a fake name, a false booking, a taxi summoned into the darkness. And then came the most chilling detail. Through trial testimony and investigative reporting, it emerged that McGoldric's murder had allegedly been carried out as a birthday present for notorious Loyalist paramilitary leader, Billy Wright, a brutal gesture meant to mark the occasion with blood. Before his name made headlines, before it carried fear, loyalty, or notoriety, Billy Wright was just a boy caught between 2 homes and one gathering storm. Born in 1960 in Wolverhampton, England, he entered a family already beginning to crack. His parents, Ulster Protestants originally from Portadown, had moved to England for work, but the marriage soon collapsed. His father, David, walked out while Billy was still young, leaving him and his 4 sisters in a household slipping into instability. When the family returned to Northern Ireland, the turmoil only deepened. The children were placed into care and separated, with Billy sent to South Armagh, a Protestant boy growing up in a predominantly Catholic, nationalist community. There his childhood unfolded in unexpected ways. He played with Catholic kids, built friendships across the divide, and even joined in Gaelic football. For a brief time, life felt normal. But in Northern Ireland, normal never lasted. The troubles were closing in, and the conflict that surrounded him would soon shape the path he was destined to take. By the 1970s, violence in Northern Ireland wasn't a distant headline, it was a constant presence, closing in on everyday life. For Billy Wright, the conflict became personal early. Several of his relatives were killed by Republican paramilitaries, each loss a stark reminder that the Troubles didn't spare families, they shattered them. One death cut deeper than the rest. Jim Wright, a Protestant Salvation Army member, former RUC reservist, and father of 4, was killed in July 1977 when the INLA planted a bomb beneath his car. The blast didn't just take a life, it tore a wound through the community. 10,000 mourners attended Jim Wright's funeral, a sea of grief and anger that showed just how deeply the violence had seeped into daily existence. For Billy, still just a teenager, the bombing's aftermath was unforgettable. It taught him how fragile life was, how permanent loss could be, and how quickly neighbors could turn into enemies. The world around him forced harsh lessons early. Loyalty mattered, fear was constant, and community lines were drawn deep. Growing up Protestant in a largely nationalist area, he lived between 2 identities, watching and absorbing everything. By adolescence, the violence on the streets and the losses in his family had already shaped him, sharpening instincts that would later pull him toward far darker paths. By the mid-1970s, the violence that had shaped Billy Wright's early life closed in on him personally. In 1976, in the tense aftermath of the Kingsmill massacre, which left 10 Protestant workers dead, the 15-year-old took his first decisive step into the world that would define him. He joined the youth wing of the Ulster Volunteer Force. For a boy still learning how to survive, the UVF offered something he never truly had: identity, structure, and a sense of purpose in a society split down the middle. It didn't take long for consequences to arrive. Wright was soon arrested for hijacking and firearms offences and sentenced to 6 years in the prison of Boston, County Down. The experience changed him. Inside, he met hardened loyalists, absorbed the unspoken rules of status and survival, and learned that reputation, feared or respected was his own form of power. He served just over half his sentence, walking out in 1980 with sharper instincts, a harder edge, and a clearer understanding of both the dangers and the opportunities awaiting him in mid-Ulster. After his release, Wright returned to Portadown and tried to live a normal life. He married, had 2 daughters, sold insurance, and even preached as a born-again Christian. But the calm was only a facade. Loyalist networks still pulled at him, and in the early 1980s, his name began resurfacing within the UVF's Mid-Ulster Brigade. Throughout the decade, Wright racked up arrests, assaults, weapons charges, intimidation, though convictions were few. What mattered more were the alliances he forged and the reputation he cultivated. By the late 1980s, he was no longer just another loyalist. He was a rising force, gaining influence and control within Mid-Ulster loyalist circles. By the late 1980s, Wright's influence was no longer whispered. It was accepted. He had carved out a reputation for ruthlessness and decisive action, traits that quickly elevated him within loyalist circles. As the 1990s approached, he rose to command the UVF's Mid-Ulster Brigade, a unit linked to a string of brutal sectarian killings. Though he was never formally convicted of murder, intelligence reports and local accounts connected him to dozens of shootings, assassinations, and bomb attacks. The boy who once played Gaelic football in Catholic South Armagh had become a man whose name carried fear on both sides of the divide, a figure for whom power, loyalty, and violence had become inseparable. From 1991 onward, the bloodshed intensified. 3 Catholics were killed in a mobile shop attack in Craigavon, an operation linked to Wright's Mid-Ulster network. In 1992, 5 people died in the Sean Graham Bookmakers Massacre. In 1994, 6 more were murdered during the Locken Island Massacre as they watched the World Cup. Only years later, through declassified files, would the extent of the support Wright's unit received become clear, exposing a blurred line between paramilitaries and elements within the security forces. These attacks were not random outbursts, they were calculated displays of control and intimidation. Subsequent investigations and police ombudsman reports confirmed that systematic failures, and at times direct collusion, allowed Wright's men to operate with near immunity. Intelligence was mishandled, surveillance faltered, and RUC officers were found to have passed information to his unit or shielded suspects from charges. In Mid-Ulster, the effect was unmistakable. Wright's grip tightened, and for many, the law felt less like protection and more like another force enabling his reign. By the mid-1990s, Billy Wright's name carried a gravity far beyond Portadown. As a commander of the UVF's Mid-Ulster Brigade, he was known for precision, ruthlessness, and a readiness to act when others held back. Under his leadership, the brigade carried out a string of sectarian killings, drive-bys, targeted shootings, cold, calculated hits, each one sharpening the fear surrounding his name. But Northern Ireland was shifting. Ceasefires were declared, negotiations advanced, and the peace process inched forward. To many it signaled hope. To Wright, it signaled betrayal. He saw compromise as capitulation, a dangerous weakening that would leave loyalist communities exposed. Inside the UVF, fault lines opened. Some were willing to engage with political progress. Others, Wright chief among them, rejected it outright. The battle lines were no longer just between loyalists and Republicans, but within loyalism itself. The Drumcree standoff in July 1996 brought those internal tensions to a breaking point. The Orange Order's push to march down the mainly Catholic Garvaghy Road ignited Portadown, and the volatile standoff gave Billy Wright the perfect stage to assert his authority. Amid the chaos, his men abducted and murdered Michael McGoldric, the Catholic taxi driver. The execution-style killing was both a message and a challenge. It signaled that Wright would act on his own terms, regardless of political negotiations or fragile ceasefires. To the UVF leadership, the murder was a reckless provocation, threatening not only the organization's ceasefire, but the fragile momentum of the peace process itself. Wright wasn't just defying the state, he was defying his own command. When the UVF expelled Billy Wright, ordering him to stand down and leave Northern Ireland, it should have ended his influence. Instead, it amplified it. Wright had built loyalty that ran deeper than organizational ties. His followers feared him, trusted him, and were willing to break ranks for him. Rather than disappear, he used the expulsion as a springboard, creating the Loyalist Volunteer Force, a group loyal not to the UVF, but to Wright alone. The LVF announced itself with spectacle and bloodshed. Thousands gathered in Portadown as Wright denounced political compromise, and soon the group began a string of sectarian killings, each one reinforcing its reputation for decisive, uncompromising violence. By 1997, the LVF had carried out more than a dozen sectarian attacks, including multiple drive-by shootings on Catholic homes and workers. One of the most chilling was the murder of John Slane. Slane, a young Catholic father, was in his West Belfast home boiling a kettle to make bottles for his newborn twin daughters when two unmasked Loyalist gunmen burst in from across the motorway. They shot him dead in his own kitchen, a killing as brazen as it was brutal. A decade later, the chief suspect in Slane's murder met a grisly fate of his own. His dismembered remains were discovered in a rubbish bin. Wright's name had become a byword for unpredictability, and his men obeyed him without question. He understood the power of fear. Every killing, every drive-by, every pub shooting was a message meant to solidify his control and prove loyalty to the LVF. Despite the trail of blood linked to his name, Wright had largely slipped through the justice system. The charge that finally put him behind bars was almost mundane by comparison, threatening to kill Gwen Reed, a woman who had witnessed an LVF punishment attack. It wasn't one of the sectarian murders that made him infamous, but it was enough. In January 1997, Wright was sentenced to 8 years and sent to the Maze prison, Northern Ireland's most secure and politically charged jail. For the first time in years, the man who had dominated Mid-Ulster found himself locked in a place built to contain the very violence he helped unleash. Even behind bars, Wright's influence never truly diminished. His presence dominated the Maze's corridors, and he was believed to be directing LVF operations through trusted intermediaries. Both Loyalist and Republican inmates knew his reputation and treated it with caution. By the end of 1997, his violent legacy felt unshakable. But the boy who once roamed Catholic streets in South Armagh now faced a new and unfamiliar vulnerability: the prison system itself. Within weeks, that vulnerability would be exploited in a way that stunned Northern Ireland. On the 27th of December 1997, Billy Wright's fearsome reputation met its reckoning. He was being escorted for a routine visit with his girlfriend, a simple movement inside what was supposed to be one of the most secure prisons in Northern Ireland. But in seconds, routine turned lethal. 3 INLA prisoners, armed with smuggled pistols, ambushed him as he climbed into the prison van. A chain of staggering security failures, a disabled CCTV camera, an unmanned watchtower, and a cut fence left unrepaired gave the attackers exactly the opening they needed. They fired repeatedly at point-blank range. The man who had terrorized towns and commanded obedience through violence died almost instantly. The aftermath of Wright's killing was immediate and electric. Inside the Maze, officers panicked, inmates froze, and word spread across Northern Ireland within minutes. His funeral in Portadown drew thousands, Loyalists, family and locals all grappling with the legacy he left behind. For some it was grief, for others a reminder of the violence he had carved into their communities. His death left a clear void in the Loyalist power structure. Soon the questions began. Why was Wright kept in the same block as sworn enemies? How did guns make it into a maximum security prison? Why were cameras down, watchtowers empty, and a cut fence left unrepaired? Was this a chain of blunders, or something orchestrated? The Batchelor inquiry probed every detail of the 27th of December 1997. Counsel Alan Kane put the core question plainly: was Wright's death a tragic failure of security, or the result of deliberate collusion? Evidence pointed to systemic breakdowns in surveillance, intelligence, and basic prison procedures that created the perfect opening for the assassins. And overshadowing it all was the earlier comment from Chief Constable Sir Hugh Annesley: it's just a question of who gets to the bastard first, us, the IRA, or the UVF. In a conflict where loyalties blurred and lines of authority frayed, Wright's murder forced Northern Ireland to confront how close those worlds had come to merging. Billy Wright's assassination left an indelible mark on Northern Ireland's fragile peace process. At the time, tensions were extremely high, and the murder risked destabilizing both Loyalist and Republican ceasefires. Officials later reflected on the delicate balancing act required to prevent retaliatory violence while keeping negotiations alive. 4 months later, the Good Friday Agreement was signed, a historic but fragile step toward peace. Yet Billy Wright's influence did not end with his death. His shadow lingered across mid-Ulster. Without him, the LVF quickly fractured. What had been a tightly controlled force splintered into rival factions, his power fading as Northern Ireland moved, however cautiously, toward a new era. The communities he scarred were left with lasting wounds, families grieving, neighborhoods marked by shootings, and memories of sectarian violence that time could not easily erase. Still, within loyalism, Wright remained a polarizing figure, feared, admired, and condemned in equal measure. That was it for today's video. What are your thoughts on today's topic? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see our next videos.